So we've been asked to prepare an overview of environmental conditions, planning, and zoning issues related to the airport. This is based primarily on review of existing reports and documents, but we've also prepared some new maps and other diagrams to start pulling together information that we've gotten from county geographic information system, the town geographic information system, and that's really what this presentation is based on. We're really trying to get a handle on what do we know and what do we need to know going forward in order to think clearly about the future of the airport. One sort of basic information data set is sort of where is the airport and what's the context of it. So this is a map showing the 610-acre sort of airport parcel, which is one of the largest areas of potential redevelopment remaining in East Hampton. It's also surrounded by a large block of forested land, which is undeveloped yet. A lot of that has been protected by the county, town of East Hampton and Southampton. If we look at the land use context, this is geographic information system information from the county and the town. So it sort of shows in green is land that's been categorized as recreational open space. This is not all permanently protected, but it's currently in open space or in recreational or other open space use. That's sort of surrounding the northern part of the airport. And then largely in Wainscott and Southampton, you have a lot of residential parcels in yellow and orange that are people's homes. In the immediate vicinity of the airport, on the property itself, within the airport holdings, there's the Maidstone Glen Club, the East Hampton Airport Industrial Park, and the airport facilities themselves. Just outside of the airport, there's a number of significant uses, including the Ross School to the north, the East Hampton Indoor Tennis facilities, and then the residential streets, again, in Wainscott and Southampton. If we look a little bit closer, you can see the location of those relative to the airport facilities. The Maidstone Glen Club occupies a town-owned piece of land just north of the airport. There's county wells, and we'll talk more about those just on the west side. There's the Airport Industrial Park, which is a number of parcels on the south side, and then the Ross School and the tennis club to the east, and then the Wainscott Sand Pit just to the south. One of the factors involving the future of the airport is the Airport Industrial Park, which has already been divided up with 33 lots on 55 acres. These are divided in turn into some that are reserved for airport-related uses and some that are not. And there is a number of available parcels, but also a number of parcels that have been pretty much fully built out. If we look at ownership, this is a map showing sort of the key categories of ownership. It's really a kind of a matrix of different owners. The red is the Suffolk County ownership, the orange, town of East Hampton, and the light yellow is the town of Southampton, with a little bit of sort of institutional nonprofit land sprinkled in. But again, a lot of that land northeast, northwest of the airport is publicly owned, and a lot of it is in conservation. Now, we want to look at sort of the physical dimension of the future of the airport. What could you build based on topography, soil conditions, and so on? So this is looking at just the surface elevations from the county elevation data. The parcel basically goes from a lower elevation of about 20 feet above sea level at Daniels Hole to another rises about 100 feet to 130 feet in the northwest corner. And the airport facilities themselves are at an elevation of about 30 feet. If we look at that in context, we see that high ground in the northwest side is really part of the east-west ridge that traverses the South Fork. And that represents the terminal moraine that was left by the glaciers. And so south of that, you basically have an outwash plain going toward the coast. And But it's also significant because the airport is entirely within the watershed of the Georgica Pond. And that's all of the land where any rain or snow that falls on that land will run downhill and either soak into the ground or find itself traveling over the surface of the ground or in drainage structures toward Georgica Pond. Now, Lisa is going to talk a little bit about how that context really relates to the conservation values of the airport property.
So in this aerial view, you can see the clearing for the airport in proximity to Georgica Pond. You can also see the clearing for the former sand mine site. And Georgica Pond has experienced harmful algal blooms, low oxygen levels, excessive bacteria levels, and the largest sources of pollution stem from groundwater flow and stormwater runoff. So in addition to Georgica Pond water quality, the conservation values of the airport include factors such as drinking water supplies, grassland vegetation, pine barrens, passive recreation, and open space. Next slide. All of Long Island is a sole source aquifer, meaning that our drinking water is derived from the aquifers beneath the land that we live on. And beneath Long Island, there are 3 water-bearing aquifers, but in East Hampton, only 2 of them are potable. That means drinkable, that they don't have salt in them. And those starting from the top are the upper glacial aquifer and the Magathie. So we've got already more limited reserves than Western Long Island. And this is here a topographic map of the top of the groundwater aquifers. And as you can see on the South Fork, there's only one contour line indicating that we have a very thin lens of groundwater on the South Fork. Next slide. So this is also a contour line of the Magathie aquifer, which also contains fresh water, but only in the western portion of the town. There isn't potable water in the Magathie, in Montauk, in Amagansett, in Springs, or Northwest. And that red circled area is about where the airport is, which really is showing in the central portion of this contour line of where the groundwater reserves are, indicating that's about the deepest reserves. Next slide, please. So the next layer of groundwater, which is closest to the top, is called the upper glacial aquifer. It lies above the Magathie and it's right below the surface of the ground. And again, that red area is supposed to be showing where the airport is, but it got moved over. So as we know, the airport is not in Bridgehampton. It's further to the east. I don't know if I'm able to show it with my pointer here. But in the upper glacial aquifer as well, the airport is really central to the deepest reserves of where that is. There's only a 10-foot groundwater contour line. There isn't a 20-foot contour line in East Hampton. And the airport is over the deepest reserves for both of the 2 potable aquifers that we have in the town. There are no barriers to runoff. There's nothing that discharges. There's very little that keeps what happens on the land from infiltrating down into the upper glacial aquifer. Next slide, please. So groundwater has 2 components to its movement. It moves vertically, meaning down, and horizontally. And as we already spoke about Georgica Pond, the horizontal movement of the groundwater from the airport area moves towards Georgica Pond. But there's also a vertical component of the groundwater that moves. And the closer that you are to the groundwater divide, which is that red dashed line that's kind of going east-west, means the more vertical component, more of the deep water recharge going down not only into the upper glacial, but to the Magathie, which are deeper reserves, that the recharge will take place. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, this is showing the same thing, that recharge really where the groundwater divide is in relation to the airport, and that means they'll have a deeper component of where the recharge is going. The airport lies over the deepest groundwater reserves, and the soils and the substratums have excellent recharge qualities. So the land serves as a major recharge zone to both the aquifers that we have for drinking water. Next slide, please. So this has also been recognized by Suffolk County Water Authority. They have a well field in this area that is surrounded by the airport, that little chunk of land that's taken out. It is a substantial well field that provides drinking water, not just to Wainscott, but as part of an interconnected system that provides water to all of East Hampton and the region. Next slide. And the Water Authority has proposed a 2 million gallon storage tank for this well field to supply water and provide additional needed capacity. So in effect, this infrastructure will increase the reliance on this well field for the water supply, and preserving large blocks of wooded land surrounding the well field provides the highest quality of groundwater recharge. Peter's going to talk a little bit about the vegetation now.
Right. So one of the interesting aspects of this is that it's a sort of a remnant of the vegetation which used to cover the entire South Fork as well as much of Long Island. And in 1930, as shown on the left, the airport site was completely forested. In 1938, the completed clearing for the airport, as you see on the right there, sort of accidentally resulted in a much more diverse plant community with grasslands that surrounded the airport and pine barrens around the periphery of the runways. Today, this has been recognized as a really interesting, globally rare ecosystem that's grown up on the runways, as often happens with airports, because they're undisturbed and because the soil was never really amended or improved. The native plants really took hold there, and it's been maintained, with occasional mowing, but otherwise has been left untouched. And this has resulted in a large number of endangered or threatened species of concern being identified, including 56 native plants. And it's really that sandy soil, again, that was sort of left behind, contained the seeds of these plants that sprouted and have been growing there ever since. And it's also true that pine barrens have been undisturbed since the clearing surrounding the airport. And these is part of a recognized sort of regional resource of fire-dependent pitch pine and mixed oak located on sandy and infertile soils. And that also has its own sort of variety of interesting and uncommon plant and animal species. Another resource of this open space surrounding the airport is the recreational value of trails. And this is a map that was prepared by the town of East Hampton, which shows existing recreational trails sort of looping north of the airport, most important of which is probably the East Hampton to Sag Harbor Trail. It comes off Montauk Highway, wraps around the airport, and then goes up, connects to the Paumanok Path. There's also a loop to the Buckskill Preserve, and then the so-called Tower Trail, which follows the power lines, all of which sort of recognizes it is actively used and is maintained by the town with mowing, removing of down trees. There are trailhead kiosks, and pretty much these three major recognized trail systems traverse the east side and the north of the existing airports, the Sag Harbor, East Hampton Trail, the Buckskill Loop, and the Tower Trail. So those are kind of the existing sort of conservation values, and Lisa will talk more about the sort of regulatory overlays that impinge on the airport. But we start to look at what could you do in the future that's really impacted by specific zoning and regulatory constraints. So these include the fact that 97 acres is zoned for parks and conservation. The rest of the site is zoned, 513 acres is zoned for commercial industrial use. And then you have that water recharge overlay district, which Lisa will talk more about, which incorporates most of the site other than the industrial park. And then there are wetlands and wetland setbacks at Daniels Hole, which is probably the only major wetland on the site. And then 47 acres that are subject to some restrictions under the Superfund designation that they received. So each of these things will affect future development in different ways. Lisa's going to talk a little bit more about some of the significant designations that apply to the airport area.
So we were mentioning a lot of the unique characteristics that are found on the airport, and these have been recognized not just by the town, but by the state and the county, and they've formulated regulations, laws, policies, and plans. So the area is part of the New York State Special Groundwater Protection Area, the Suffolk County Pine Barrens Area, the Town Water Recharge Overlay District, which I'll also explain, part of a critical environmental area. It's part of the town priority drinking water protection area, and the town comprehensive plan has recommendations for part of the areas that should be permanently protected. Next slide, please. So here's a depiction of where the Special Groundwater Protection Area is in East Hampton and in Southampton. As you can see, they're broad areas that it applies to, but the largest block of land left in East Hampton, which is the airport, offers the greatest opportunity to realize and implement these protection goals that are critical for all of East Hampton. Next slide. Oh, wait. So I'm sorry. So the plan that was done for the Special Groundwater Protection Area recommends is that the counties and towns continue to acquire and preserve the woodlands in the area. And as Peter was showing in the earlier slide, both Southampton Town and East Hampton Town have preserved large blocks of land around this. If there is to be any sort of development, use every technique that planning offers in terms of transferring development out of this area to preserve large blocks of land. To rezone the land, if it is zoned for commercial industrial, to some sort of residential use, to the lowest density, the lowest impact that you can legally do. And that you limit any sort of commercial and industrial uses to those areas that are already so developed. And as I've mentioned before, there is the large former sand pit area that's just to the south of the airport. Next slide, please. So again, the Suffolk County Pine Barrens is recognized that this is a very important area. It's a groundwater recharge area with a unique natural ecological community that has natural ecological and aesthetic values, and that it's under increasing development pressures that threatens these resources. Next slide, please. And so the policies that are recommended by the county would be, again, it's just reiterative of what we just said, concentrate development near existing roads, existing development, keep large blocks of open space open, to restrict the amount of clearing that is permitted with any sort of development, 65%, and to limit the amount of vegetation that's requiring fertilization to 15%. Next slide, please. So the town has also recognized that there are large areas of disproportionate amount of groundwater recharge, and we were mentioning earlier the special qualities this particular parcel has. And so there are regulations to help protect these resources. Next slide. So if there are subdivisions, to do what's called an open space plan to preserve as much a large block as you can and keep the development tightly clustered, to restrict clearing to just 50% of the lots, and to restrict buildings to the maximum of 30% of a lot area. Next slide, please. So it has also been designated as a critical environmental area, which has legal requirements that before there is any sort of development in these areas, that the decision makers come up with a finding that the development will not have a threat to human health. It will not diminish wildlife habitat, forest and vegetation, open space, areas of important aesthetic or scenic quality, that it won't impact recreational or educational values or inherent ecological, geological, or hydrological sensitivity. So again, we were talking about the importance of this parcel with all of these traits. These would have to be found to be the minimum impacts to the areas. Next slide, please. And the town comprehensive plan has recognized the importance of this area. The town looked at what are the priority drinking water areas in all of the town and designated these areas in red as being the highest importance. So you have some of them on the airport property, the 97 acres that's near the Power Line Road, and the 107 acres that are north of Daniels Hole Road, because of many of the qualities that we've already discussed that those land areas have. And the fact that they're protected within a large block of land actually increases its importance and significance. Next slide. So these are those two parcels that were just mentioned. So they should be forever protected according to the town comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. So additional considerations for protection that the town has always taken into consideration are the grassland communities that Peter was mentioning. It's a globally rare ecosystem, and when the town identifies such features, they do their best to protect it, to acquire it, or to not allow any sort of development in it. The other is that it's the largest block of intact pine barrens in East Hampton that has a large number of unique and rare species as well. And so preserving large blocks, there are few opportunities to do that, but this is part of a large block already, and that's an preserve. So preservation of these two ecosystems is supported by the town's policies and practices to preserve natural biodiversity and significant ecological communities. And the town comprehensive plan recommends protecting the pine barren site type and biodiversity within Wainscott, and diminishment or disruption of these ecosystems could have large adverse environmental impacts on biodiversity and the groundwater resources in the town. Next slide, please. So in sum, the area of the airport is one of the most intense uses of land where the aviation activities occur, but the undeveloped setting of the airport includes very important conservation resources, including the Georgia Pond watershed, critical drinking water reserves, and public water infrastructure, a unique grassland ecosystem, East Hampton's largest area of pine barrens, and established trails and recreation open space. The airport park and other private lands that are primarily south of the airport host a variety of commercial, industrial, and recreational and institutional unit uses. And there are many opportunities for redevelopment and expansion in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you.